Hi everyone, I'm Allison. Thank you for joining me for Where I'm From 193 with Davina, who's right here because we're on Zoom. I just read, oh boy, The Wanderer's Curse by Jennifer Hope Choi, which is about the Wanderer's Curse, that both she and her mother, it's a memoir. It's something that they both sort of deal with, and it kind of talks about all the different ways they wandered and how they wandered in and out of each other's lives. Anyway, it's a beautiful memoir. Davina, have you read something recently?
I have. There are a couple that I've read,
Mhm.
and the one that really stands out is Everything Sad is Untrue.
Oh, I've heard that title, but I haven't read
And
it.
it's amazing. And I think it's actually like a teenage young adult fiction, not fiction at all, autobiographical
Hmm,
novel,
hmm.
based on an Iranian refugee who comes
Yeah.
over
Uh-huh.
as a teenager, but he also interweaves stories from Iran. And it's amazing. And he keeps it light.
I have to read
It's a
that.
wonderful story.
Los Angeles is a huge Iranian population, and so I think this is like the biggest here. Um, so I have lots of friends. So it's lovely to. I mean, I've read, obviously books about that experience, but I'm always I find it obviously it helps our compassion and understanding to read about experiences that aren't our own, which is why they want to ban books. So if they're banning it, I always feel like, well, that's a book I need to read. But this sounds beautiful. So thank you for sharing. Because I know I've heard the title, but it's like there's so many good books in the world that
Yep.
it's sometimes hard for me to uh, remember all of them. So, Davina,
Yeah.
you are here because of Estelle Erasmus, correct? That's how
Yes.
we connected. Thank you,
Yep. Wonderful,
Estelle.
Estelle.
Mhm. Yes. And I want to say it because I want you to celebrate this win that you wrote this essay, and we can't read it yet, but you won. You are the runner-up. What are you specifically? Sorry, it's hard titles.
The runner-up of a short non-fiction
Okay,
essay for the Kenyon Review
that's a big deal.
in 2025 winter
Okay.
contest. Yeah. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank
That's a
you.
big, it is so hard to make it past. I mean, it's really difficult when you're being read by judges to stand out. So I'm sure your piece is brilliant and congratulations. I look forward to reading it. Um, what is the title of it? It's very evocative.
Trying to teach a 6-year-old about genocide.
Yeah, which is sadly very apropos. I hope there's a time when it's not, but it doesn't seem to be right now. So um, that's, I think, something all of us as parents reckon with, right? Like how do we talk about these things? Because you want children to be children. You don't want to like dump everything, but you also don't want them to be unaware of the world and also what you have lived through, what I have lived, all the different things we've lived through. When and how do we talk to our children about these things?
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Because I had my experience. I mean, it was my parents
Hmm.
that didn't necessarily even go through it directly themselves, but their siblings and their parents went through it and their friends and family. So I felt it was harder for them to communicate what was going on to me
Yeah.
because it was happening while I was being born and in my young childhood. So by the time my children came along, I had time to consider how
Hmm.
I could kind of control the narrative in some way. Um, and life's moved on. So luckily we can talk about the brighter side of things. So my parents are born in Cambodia,
Hmm.
and we went there at winter,
Oh, did
my
you?
family and I, yeah,
I've heard it's
and
beautiful. I've never heard.
it's amazing,
Yeah.
and my kids loved it. They
Oh,
absolutely loved it. So yeah, yeah. But the I have a 9-year-old and a 13-year-old. Um, and so obviously like what I tell the 13-year-old is slightly different to what I tell the
sure. It
9-year-old.
evolves over time, right? There's more you
Yeah,
can tell. I mean, like, yeah, like when George
yeah,
Floyd was murdered, my older kid, I could talk more about the specifics of what occurred. My
yeah.
younger kid, obviously, we're talking about murder, but we're maybe not talking about the
Yeah,
specifics. Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. It's interesting because The Wanderer's Curse, Jennifer Hope Choi is Korean American, and so she talks about the Korean War, which most I find Korean American memoirists do, and um, it almost seems like it takes time because the people who lived through it can't have perspective. Like they just lived through the trauma. They can't because that was a genocide of sorts as well, the Korean
yeah,
War that we call the Korean War. But what was the war about, right? So it's been interesting seeing how people are talking about that now, 75 years out, very
yeah,
differently than 40 years out, or, and it's, I think it's really difficult too when the messaging is so counter to the reality. It's like
yeah.
it takes time to untangle all of that, which is obviously the point of the false messaging, but it's not like you can immediately identify it always.
I think that's true. And I think for the book and the collection of essays
Yeah.
that you're releasing, I think the similarities are that silent grief
Yeah.
and how, as someone who didn't experience it, whose generation didn't experience it,
Mhm.
but it still gets to me
Of
or
course.
has done, and
Yes.
you don't necessarily feel, how do you deal with that?
Yes.
And
Um,
then as I was older, I started, obviously not started talking to lots of people, but I've started noticing more and more stories about my friends or other people's grandparents or parents. And these stories come through about Auschwitz
yes.
or the start of the Second World War,
Yes.
and you realize that so many more people have got stories to tell like that about what happened to their parents, what happened to their grandparents, or even themselves. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Well, and I think, I don't know if you've ever read Resmaa Menakem. He wrote My Grandmother's Hands, but he talks a lot about intergenerational trauma and how um, he's Black American, so he's talking a lot about enslavement and being a enslaver and how generationally that is carried and how we start to see it as culture or who we are when in fact it's just this trauma that's being passed down. Um, and that really resonated with me. Um,
Yeah.
Being from, white Western European background, there's a lot of trauma that's being passed down and being told that it's culture or tradition,
Yes.
you know,
Yes. Yeah.
when really it's just not great for anyone. Uh, so try to interrogate it a bit. So I thought that was an interesting um, and so such a powerful perspective. Like we can change these things.
Yes.
Um,
Definitely.
so speaking of, would you like to read your poem?
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you for having me.
Oh yes, my pleasure.
Where I'm from. I am from videotapes, from Hollywood blockbusters and BBC sitcoms. I am from a new build home in a maze of cul-de-sacs and alleyways, beige, identical, but laughter penetrates the air and vibrates against the windows and walls. I am from the pampas bush I brush past every day. Feathery fronds tickle my face, but the sharp spiky leaves I sweep away. I am from Crazy Eight card games and hot tempers from Sam and Mollie. I am from home bought study guides and feast with friends, from work first, play later, and our guests are here. I'm from Christian prayers and Buddhist blessings. I am from England, yet Cambodia flows through my veins, a land of communist genocide, child soldiers, disease and starvation, mass evacuations, emptied cities, recovering nicely, paddy fields, palm trees, paradise beaches, rice with everything, and stir-fried meats. I am from escapees from the Civil War, my father's hard work. The grad school scholarship took my parents across the world before the genocide, the reason I am from anywhere.
Feels weird to clap. Um, because that is, I mean, that's a really powerful last line. And I think as we're talking about these different genocides, that is always parallel to those stories. Like this sort of, so few people make it out of those situations.
Right, right.
Um,
And the story is well, the long story is my dad was for the village and decided to study himself. Started school a year earlier, took the books, bought, caught fireflies, put them in jars to light up his books at night.
Wow.
And yep.
Like out of a movie. Okay.
And then he's a clever chap, my dad, and
Yes.
he made it to university
Wow.
in the capital, and then from there in the early 70s there was a scheme where a group of engineers were given scholarships to do a master's degree in the UK, and he was one of them. And so he went over, and then my mum followed, luckily just before the Khmer Rouge started. So, yeah, that's the
A
story.
miracle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
That he didn't know he was working towards, which is usually how miracles work. We don't know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Incredible. And then, but the grief that they must have carried with them and the survivor's guilt.
yeah, yeah. It's they carried it in different ways, as you can imagine,
Sure.
and meeting other Cambodians as well. Obviously, everyone carries it in different ways. Some
Yeah.
people um, want to make sure their children know everything about Cambodia,
Yeah.
whereas some people need to close off a little bit
Mhm.
because they don't know Cambodia was going through this communication blackout in the late 70s and even in the early 80s, and so um, kind of wanting to block it out
Mhm.
was my mum's experience.
Mhm.
But at the same time, there was because there's only 1,000 at the time. There were a few hundred, I think, Cambodians in the UK. There weren't many
Mm.
at all.
Right. That's a small
Um,
population.
yeah, there are
Mhm.
more now. There's like 11,000, but
Mhm.
back
Mhm.
then, there weren't many at all. And so they were a tight knit community.
Yeah.
They started the Cambodian UK society and
Mhm.
things like that. So they kind of had each other. They had some friends in France as well. There's a family in France, but yeah, it was tough, to say the least.
Yeah, I was recently we went to the Museum of Tolerance in LA, a big group of us, which is a, a lot about the Holocaust. And when you go into the uh, thing, it's a museum, the exhibit. Yes, that's the word. They give you a card, and then when you come out, you have a person, their name, their biography, and then when you come out, you find out if you made it. Um, and in a group of 50 of us, three of us made it. And, they raised their hands. And I thought it was just such a brilliant way to kind of make it real. Like, obviously, we can never know, but just the sheer numbers. Because when we read 1 million or 2 million, or, you know, it's like that's a lot of that's horrific. That's a lot of people. But when you think about what that did to communities, not only families, but whole communities, whole lineages, it's still impossible to imagine. But I thought that was a really brilliant way to try.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it does. When you think, yeah, every family was
Right,
touched
right, right.
in Cambodia.
And
Every
some
family.
families are gone
Yeah,
entirely.
yeah,
Um, and I think, yeah, it's just and I think the apparatus, or whatever word you want to use to do something like that, is if cruelty is not in your nature, is difficult to comprehend as well.
yeah,
um so, and we've all spent a lot of time trying to understand it, but I think all we can do is do the other thing. I don't know that we can understand it.
yeah, yeah,
I don't know if that's the point. I certainly believe that us just telling our stories and what we've lived through matters, because I really do think that the more we bury things and the more shame we have, cruelty is like closer at hand to
yeah,
ourselves. and then
Yeah.
ultimately to others, because I certainly was the cruelest to myself when I was the most filled with shame. And I think I probably wasn't great to be around either. you know, uh, so I'm
And
imagining, unless they're all psychopaths, they're filled with shame.
yeah. And I think it's something you were saying before in the emails. We were talking about being heard as well,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And not necessarily through a poem or even writing, but sometimes people just bury these stories and just having someone listen to them go, oh, oh, it's really important.
Well, and to
It's
not push it
healing.
away, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it
yeah.
is.
It's amazing. For me, I remember, we all have different things that we talk about that people don't want to hear. I think
Yes,
most
yes.
people, most people. And I mean, that's the big reason I fell in love with my husband. He was one of the first, he was probably the first person I dated who wasn't uncomfortable with me,
Yeah,
just talking about what I lived through and what I felt shaped me. Um, it wasn't, well, look at you now, or whatever.
yes. Yeah. And had you tried to talk to other people about it, or were you trying to suppress it
I mean, the
kind of
thing,
as
I
a
was a big talker. It was kind of the
right?
way that so I was raped when I was 17, and I then it, uncovered memories of things that had happened to me when I was a child, because I had buried those really deep down, because I was tiny and trying to survive, much like anyone who's been through something horrific, right? You're just trying to get to the other side. And so when that happened, when I was 17, I did start talking about it because I felt like I was losing my mind. And so
Yeah,
that was kind of the only way I knew how to hold on to some kind of sanity, was to talk about it. And it was not popular. I mean, this was 1991. People were not
yeah,
wanting to talk about it. It was very much that culture of like the perfect rape victim, and I wasn't her. And it's been so interesting for me with all kinds of trauma. There's this idea of the perfect victim, right? It's the same thing with poor people. There's like the
mm,
perfect poor person. And then you realize that who deserves your help, right? You have to be perfect. And then I've realized, as I've met more and more people who've been raped or all kinds of different things, that doesn't actually exist. You realize, like, oh, they have the perfect story, still no one gives a shit. Um,
yeah,
like the people who don't care still don't care.
right.
And so I think, I mean, that was really eye-opening for me. And I feel like it's so many different, even like I just co-edited an anthology about sibling loss, and that
Yeah,
is you think sad, right? Your sibling died. And it's so interesting how many people just have no space for it. They just don't, they just can't, they can't engage with the grief. And they I think it's hard for people that think about mortality. Um,
yeah,
but once you start, you kind of don't ever stop. I don't know what it's like to not think about it. It's
yeah.
my everyday companion. Um, but I
I
think
mean,
we're all doing it. So you could pretend like it's not going to happen, but it is. So yeah, yeah, I would talk her. Uh, but it's interesting too, like how even that changes what you talk about, how you talk about it, how apologetic I was about it, how angry I was. So angry. Uh,
right, which is obviously understandable.
yeah, yeah, I think it's one of the first stages, right? To just feel like you are allowed to be angry.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And that could
Yeah,
take a long time to just get past where you're just glad you're here. And I think my therapist really early on said to me, it's much easier for you as a child to think you were the problem, right? Because it's much safer to imagine that you're the problem than that you're not safe.
Right. Right.
And I think that's where the whole perfect narrative comes from. The perfect victim, the perfect poor person, the perfect refugee, the perfect, all these narratives that we force on people
Yeah. Yeah.
when in fact these systems that are creating these people shouldn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of is it the Good Immigrant book,
Sure.
talking
Yeah.
about perfect refugee and the
Right.
good immigrant. Do I fall
Right.
into that
The
category or
right
not?
way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That obviously
Exactly.
that's been a real tagline around politics here. The right way to immigrate. It's like, okay, what does that even mean? I mean, obviously they have a definition, but it's just
Yeah.
nonsense. um,
Yeah.
as a person who lives in a city with millions of people who didn't do it the quote unquote right way, who hold up the city and make it go and are what, like integral to our existence. But it doesn't acknowledge any of that with those narratives. So,
Yeah.
um, anyway, I'm glad you're telling this story. I I think it's so powerful to return to these stories that it isn't just the story of because I don't know if you find this, but I've talked to different writers who do where they'll be told, oh, we already have a Korean American book, or we already have a like Cambodian, Killing Fields book or what. And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, but this there's room for more than one or 10. Um, because it's coming at it from a different place because no one is a monolith and no experience is monolithic. And so I'm grateful that you don't feel like, oh well, I don't deserve to tell this story because you aren't fully in it or some nonsense.
Right. Well, and that is actually that's an interesting topic because actually, when I first started writing, I knew I wanted to write about.
Sure.
I guess I didn't know at the time what I wanted to write about. I knew what had happened. I didn't. I was saying I don't want to write another Killing Fields book, but
Mhm.
also it was not my place to because I
Right.
wasn't there.
Right.
Um, and at first, I went one way, started thinking about my family, and I started thinking about me, and then kind of realized it's kind of like a merger of that. And again, I don't know about you, but when you start writing and you start thinking, oh, that's interesting about that's what I'd like to write about. You start then noticing other books and you start reading it and then you
Mhm.
get obsessed and then you realize there
Mhm.
are so many books, but they're all really interesting and just told in different ways because obviously it's like universal feelings, but the stories are unique. And so that's what I'm going through at the moment. There are so many amazing books where I feel are not necessarily similar, but the second generation, the intergenerational
Yeah.
trauma, some are fiction, some are non-fiction,
Hmm.
some are memoirs,
Hmm.
some are
Hmm.
narrative non-fiction, autobiographical novels. And so it's yeah, and I'm still finding it fascinating. I think.
Yes. And I mean we have to wrap up, but I just want to say when I did go to the Museum of Tolerance, the woman there was a survivor talk. They do survivor talks every Sunday. And she was a second, her mother lived through it. And she said, this is my responsibility. Like
Yes.
I am here to tell this story and I will tell this story until I'm not here anymore because people need to understand the human consequences. And I, yeah, you know, I- it's important. Your story is important. I'm glad you're telling it, and I look forward to reading your book. Um, any last thoughts before I could talk to you for like an hour? But I have to give my husband a ride. So, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Not really, except that I've got your book on order.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it's not for every, I mean, if you haven't lost a sibling, it might be a bit heavy, but I know that my friend recently read it who just felt like it was a nice acknowledgement of anyone who's had disenfranchised grief, which sadly is most of us. So,
That was exactly it. I mean,
yeah,
I say this well, but it's exactly that.
yeah,
It's the silent grieving.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm really
So I
interested in
hadn't
it.
really
So
thought of that because we were like, we're serving a population that really hasn't been served, and we're just grateful to add to a conversation that's nascent. But I thought that was really beautiful. She's my good friend for a reason. So that was sweet of her. But thank you so much for your time and your poem. And I really, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, now I have to figure out how to stop recording. This is the awkward part where Allison tries to stop recording. Goodness gracious.
I could just
Oh,
try and
there it
do
is.